The moment your heart stops, your consciousness doesn't vanish. It negotiates. Not with God, not with angels, not with some cosmic judge weighing your sins. It negotiates with the electromagnetic signature of your final thought, which acts as a coordinate system for where you'll materialize next. This isn't theology, it's physics meeting consciousness at the edge of biology. The Tibetan monks who sat in meditation for 49 days before death weren't preparing their souls for heaven. They were programming their destination with the precision of engineers setting coordinates on a spacecraft. They understood something that Western medicine is only now beginning to document. The final thought isn't random. It's the most important decision you'll ever make, and most people arrive at it completely untrained. In 1987, Dr. Sam Parnia at the University of Southampton began cataloging something medical science couldn't explain: terminal lucidity. Alzheimer's patients with decades of destroyed neural tissue, people who hadn't recognized their own children in years, suddenly snapping into complete clarity 48 hours before death. Speaking coherently, solving problems, recounting memories with perfect detail, as if something independent of the brain was taking control of the body one last time, preparing for departure, setting its trajectory. The US Army's now declassified research from Fort Meade's remote viewing program discovered that trained operatives could accurately describe locations they'd never physically seen by holding a specific mental image in consciousness. The image acted as a frequency, a navigational beacon that consciousness could follow across space. Your last thought works identically, but instead of projecting across geography, it projects across the membrane between life and death. This isn't spiritual poetry. This is documented, repeatable, measurable. The implications unravel everything you've been told about what happens when you die. The question isn't whether you continue. Every major tradition, every near-death account, every documented case of terminal lucidity confirms that something continues. The question is whether you've been training for the most important moment of your existence, or sleepwalking toward a destination you didn't choose and can't control. Every spiritual tradition that survived long enough to document the dying process describes the same phenomenon with different language. Consciousness detaching from dense matter, transitioning through intermediate states, encountering light, space, beings, memories, then reconstituting in a new form, a new location, a new frequency of experience. The details vary, but the structure remains constant, which means we're not looking at mythology. We're looking at reports from the same territory, mapped by different travelers. The Bardo Thodol, what the West mistranslates as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, isn't religious scripture. Read the original texts. It's a technical manual for navigating consciousness without a body, created by monks who practiced death daily through meditation. They'd induce states so deep that breathing stopped, heart rate dropped to undetectable levels, and they'd return hours later with detailed maps of what they encountered. They discovered that the dying process follows predictable phases. First, the dissolution of elements. Earth dissolves into water. You lose physical stability, the sense of solidity. Water dissolves into fire. Fluids cease circulating. Temperature regulation fails. Fire dissolves into air. Warmth leaves the body, starting at the extremities. Air dissolves into consciousness. Breath stops, and something else takes over. Then come the light phenomena. Not metaphorical light, actual luminosity that dying people report seeing. White light, golden light, sometimes colored lights in specific sequences. The Tibetan texts map 8 distinct stages of light appearances, each corresponding to different levels of consciousness, unpacking from biology. And finally, for those trained enough to recognize it, a moment of pure awareness the texts call clear light, which, according to their measurements, lasts between 3 and 7 seconds. What you hold in awareness during this window determines everything. In 1975, physicist Evan Harris Walker published calculations in the Journal of Consciousness Studies showing that consciousness collapse events in quantum systems require an observer function. Something has to be watching for the wave to collapse into a particle. The brain facilitates this observation, but Walker's math suggested it might not generate it. Consciousness could be fundamental, using the brain as an instrument, but not dependent on it for existence. When the brain dies, the observer doesn't disappear. It loses its anchor. The CIA's 1983 document, Analysis and Assessment of Gateway Process, sat classified for nearly 40 years before public release. In it, Army Lieutenant Colonel Wayne McDonnell concluded that consciousness operates as a holographic frequency pattern that can exist independent of physical substrate. The brain is a receiver, a transducer, not the source. When the receiver shatters, the signal continues, just without a local channel. Meanwhile, Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted the largest study of its kind, 344 cardiac arrest survivors across 10 hospitals. 18% reported conscious experiences during clinical death. Not dreams, not hallucinations, verified perceptions. A woman described a conversation between doctors in a room 2 floors above her body. A man recounted the serial number on top of a crash cart he couldn't have seen from the operating table. They were watching, aware, mobile, while their brains showed zero activity. And in every single case, their final thought before cardiac arrest, whether it was panic, peace, prayer, or resistance, shaped the entire experience. Those who went into death with fear encountered dark, chaotic environments. Those who surrendered into curiosity found expansive, luminous spaces. The architecture didn't change. Their frequency of entry did. The Egyptians knew this. The pyramid texts, carved into stone 4,000 years ago, describe the soul's journey through the duat, a realm of gates, trials, and guardians. To pass through each gate, the deceased had to speak specific words, not prayers. Frequencies encoded as language. The hieroglyphs weren't decorative. They were phonetic instructions for producing tones that opened passage between worlds. The architecture isn't random, it's structured, responsive, waiting for an instruction you probably don't know you're supposed to give. And if you arrive at the threshold untrained, your consciousness defaults to whatever frequency you've been habitually generating your entire life. Which, for most people, is fear. Thoughts aren't abstract. They're not invisible, intangible events happening in some private mental space. They're measurable electromagnetic phenomena with specific frequencies, amplitudes, and coherence patterns that extend beyond your skull and into the space around you. Every time you think, your brain generates a field. Magnetoencephalography scanners can measure it, roughly 3 feet in diameter for most people, larger during intense emotional or meditative states. This field doesn't stop at your skin. It radiates outward, intersecting with other fields, carrying information in its structure. What most neuroscientists won't tell you, because it threatens the materialist paradigm, is that these fields don't require the brain to exist. In 2014, physicist Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed orchestrated objective reduction, a model where consciousness arises from quantum vibrations in microtubules, protein structures inside neurons. These microtubules continue oscillating for up to 72 hours after clinical death. The brain stops, but the quantum substrate keeps humming, encoding information as frequency. And frequency, in physics, is location. Tune a radio to 98.7 FM, you get one station. Tune to 101.3, you get another. Same device, different frequency, completely different content. Your consciousness operates on the same principle. You're not moving through space to access different realities. You're changing channels, tuning to different frequencies, and experiencing the content that exists at that bandwidth. The HeartMath Institute's suppressed research from the 1990s demonstrated that emotional states produce coherent or chaotic waveforms in the heart's electromagnetic field. Coherent emotions, love, gratitude, peace, generate smooth sine wave patterns. Chaotic emotions, fear, anger, anxiety, produce jagged, irregular spikes. These patterns aren't contained in your body. They broadcast outward, influencing the nervous systems of people around you, measurable up to 10 feet away. You are a walking radio transmitter, and you've been broadcasting your habitual frequency your entire life. In ancient Egypt, initiates spent years training in the temples before undergoing death rites. Not metaphorical death, simulated death, induced through breath work, fasting, and entheogenic substances. They'd practice navigating the duat while still alive, learning to speak the words of power, not prayers, but specific phonetic frequencies that opened gates in consciousness. Modern sound healing researchers have rediscovered some of this technology. Certain frequencies, 432 Hz, 528 Hz, 963 Hz, produce measurable changes in water crystallization, cell regeneration rates, and brainwave entrainment. You are 70% water. Your thoughts are vibrations moving through that water, creating interference patterns that shape your biology in real time. Every thought you think is literally restructuring your cells, training your system to resonate at specific frequencies. And at death, when the body fails and consciousness detaches, your final thought emits a frequency. That frequency is a beacon. Somewhere in the architecture of reality, call it the bardo, call it the quantum field, call it the holographic substrate of consciousness, something is listening for that signal. And when it detects your frequency, it pulls you toward the corresponding environment. The mechanism isn't mystical, it's resonance. You've seen it in physics class. Strike a tuning fork at 440 Hz near a piano, and the A string starts vibrating, even though you didn't touch it. Same frequency. Sympathetic resonance. Your consciousness at death works identically. You emit a frequency, and the universe matches you to the environment that resonates at that same bandwidth. Most people spend their entire lives thinking thoughts of fear, scarcity, resentment, distraction. They never train a different frequency. And then they die, emit that habitual signal, and wonder why they end up somewhere dark, confused, heavy. You're not punished for your thoughts. You're relocated by them. And you've been setting your coordinates every single day of your life. In 2019, a 43-year-old architect named David Kellerman flatlined on an operating table in Portland, Oregon. Ruptured spleen from a motorcycle accident. He lost too much blood too fast. His heart stopped for 4 minutes and 18 seconds while the trauma team worked to restart it. When he came back, he told his doctors something that ended up in a case study at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He said he remembered standing at a threshold. Not metaphorically, actually standing, though he had no body, in a space between two distinct zones of light. One was warm, golden, pulling him with a sensation he described as gravity, not physical gravity, but emotional gravity. It felt like rest, completion, the end of striving. He said it smelled like his grandmother's house, like safety, like coming home after a long journey. The other was cool, blue, and required effort to approach. It didn't pull him, it challenged him. It felt, he said, like the sensation you get staring at a blank canvas or an empty plot of land, potential, tension. The ache of something waiting to be made, and in that space between, suspended in a silence he said was louder than any sound he'd ever heard. He had a thought. Not a prayer, not a plea, not please, God, Let me live. Just a single, clear intention that arose from somewhere deeper than language. I'm not finished creating. He described moving toward the blue light, which felt like swimming upstream against current, every movement deliberate.
And then impact. Violent, disorienting, like being shoved back into a body 3 sizes too small. Pain exploded through his chest. Voices shouting. Bright surgical lights. He was back. 6 months later, David began experiencing something he couldn't explain. He'd be sketching a building design and suddenly his hand would move on its own, drawing architectural elements he'd never studied. Intricate Islamic geometric tessellations, Gothic ribbed vaulting systems, flying buttress configurations he'd never encountered in his training.
He tested it. He sketched a structure from memory, a detailed facade with specific tile patterns, arched windows, colored glass mosaics. Then he searched for it online. It was the Nasir al-Mulk Mosque in Shiraz, Iran, built in 1888. He'd never traveled outside the United States. He'd never seen this building in any textbook or documentary. It kept happening. Byzantine domes, Mughal garden layouts, pre-Columbian step pyramid proportions, all flowing through him like he was downloading blueprints from some vast library he'd been given access to. When researchers at Johns Hopkins asked him to describe his choice at the threshold, he said it wasn't intellectual. He didn't weigh options or consider consequences. It was felt. The golden light carried the frequency of completion, warm, safe, final. The blue carried the frequency of tension, creation, incompleteness. And his final thought before he flatlined, the thought he was holding when his motorcycle hit the guardrail, was frustration about an unfinished design project sitting on his desk at home. That thought became his compass. It tuned his consciousness to the frequency of creation. And when he stood at the threshold, he recognized which light matched that frequency. He didn't choose with his mind. He chose with the resonance of his final thought. You can test this mechanism right now. You don't need to die to feel it. Close your eyes. Think about something you deeply desire. Not want, desire. Something you ache for with your entire body. Where do you feel it? Chest, throat, gut, spine? That's not emotion. That's frequency, localizing in your biology. Now think about something you fear. Different location, different quality of sensation. Maybe contraction in the belly, tightness in the throat, pressure behind the eyes. Different frequency, different feeling tone. These aren't symbols. They're navigation systems your body has been using your entire life, preparing you to choose in the moment when thinking stops and only feeling remains. David didn't choose with logic. He chose with the feeling tone of his final thought, which had been tuned by years of obsession with creation. And it brought him back to finish what he'd started. The ancient Greeks had a word for it, metanoia. It's usually translated as repentance, which misses the meaning entirely. Metanoia means a fundamental reorientation of mind, a complete shift in perception, not guilt, not apology, transformation. Modern neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated thought patterns, forming new neural pathways while pruning unused ones. But both traditions, ancient and modern, are pointing to the same mechanism. You are not a fixed self. You are a dynamic process of becoming, constantly shaped by the frequencies you habitually generate. In 2021, researchers at UC San Diego studied advanced meditation practitioners, people with 10,000 hours or more of practice. They discovered these adepts could shift their dominant brainwave state from beta, the normal waking frequency, to theta, the deep meditative state, within 90 seconds. A transition that takes untrained people 20 minutes of progressive relaxation. These practitioners could execute at will. They trained their consciousness to change channels on command. This isn't spiritual talent. This isn't genetic gift, it's practice. Repetition. 10,000 hours of telling your nervous system, this frequency is available. You can access it whenever you choose. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and philosopher, wrote in his private journals, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought, for the soul is dyed by its thoughts." He wasn't being poetic. He was describing frequency entrainment, the phenomenon where oscillating systems synchronize to the strongest rhythm in their environment. Put a dozen grandfather clocks in a room with pendulums swinging at different rates. Come back in 2 days. They'll all be synchronized, swinging in perfect unison. They entrained to the dominant frequency. Your consciousness works the same way. If your habitual thought is fear, your baseline frequency tunes to fear's bandwidth. If your habitual thought is curiosity, your system tunes there instead. Whatever rhythm you practice most becomes your default. And at death, you don't suddenly transcend your habits. You default to them. The threshold doesn't grant you sudden clarity or wisdom you didn't cultivate while alive. It reveals what you've been practicing all along. But here's the gift hidden in this mechanism. You can retrain your default right now. Not through affirmations or forced positivity. Those are just thoughts pasted over deeper frequencies. But through a practice the Tibetan monks called Phawa, the transference of consciousness. It sounds esoteric. It's shockingly simple. Each night before sleep, your brain naturally transitions through states. From beta, your waking analytical frequency, down to alpha, the relaxed but aware state. Then to theta, where dreams begin. And finally delta, deep unconsciousness. The transition from alpha to theta, that window right before you fall asleep, is nearly identical in brain activity to the early stages of dying. Consciousness loosening from body, thoughts dissolving, identity softening. In that window, hold a single thought, not a wish, not a goal, an identity statement in present tense. I am awareness. I am light. I am creation. You're not trying to believe it. You're not affirming something you hope becomes true. You're practicing the frequency of it, training your nervous system to recognize this bandwidth, so that when your final moment arrives, this frequency is your home channel. Death becomes not a crisis, but a return. Not a collapse into the unknown, but a reorientation to what you've been rehearsing in every threshold moment of your life. The transformation isn't about becoming something you're not. It's about remembering what you've always been, beneath the noise of fear and conditioning. The monks didn't prepare for death by imagining heaven. They practiced consciousness untethered from body, over and over, until it became as natural as breathing. And when the final breath came, they knew exactly where to place their awareness, because they'd been there 1,000 times before. You have the same capability, the same neurology, the same consciousness substrate. What you lack isn't capacity, it's practice. And you have every single night for the rest of your life to train. Do you remember the question we opened with? Whether your last thought determines your next reality. Not in some distant afterlife, centuries from now, after judgment and purgatory and divine deliberation, but immediately, right there at the threshold, as your consciousness detaches from biology and transitions into whatever is next. The monks were right. The physicists were right. The mystics and the materialists were describing the same mechanism from different angles. Consciousness is a frequency. Death is a channel change. And your final thought is the dial. But here's what changes everything. Here's the shift that makes this not terrifying, but empowering. You don't have to wait until you're dying to discover what your final thought will be. You're rehearsing it every single day. Every time you fall asleep, You practice letting go of the body, the sensation of weight disappearing, thought dissolving, identity loosening. Every night, you die a little death, and every morning, you return. And what determines the quality of your sleep, the content of your dreams, the depth of your rest? The thought you hold as you cross the threshold into unconsciousness. Every time you encounter fear and choose awareness instead, you strengthen that frequency. Every time you pause in the middle of chaos, traffic, argument, crisis, pain, and return to breath, to presence, to the simple fact of being alive right now in this moment, you're tuning the channel you'll default to when the body finally fails. The external world hasn't changed. People still die. Uncertainty remains. Suffering exists. But your relationship to that final moment has fundamentally shifted. You're no longer passively waiting for death to happen to you, hoping you'll magically have the right thought when the time comes. You're actively preparing for the most important decision you'll ever make. Not with anxiety or control or desperate grasping. With practice, with clarity, with the calm confidence of someone who's trained for this. Start tonight. Lie down. Feel your body settling into the mattress, weight distributing, muscles releasing. Notice the moment when you're no longer fully awake but not yet unconscious, that threshold between states, that liminal space where identity softens and something deeper takes over. In that space, hold this, say it slowly, let the words vibrate in your chest. I am the awareness that witnesses thought. I choose the frequency of my becoming. I am sovereign in every transition. Don't rush it. Don't perform it. Feel each sentence as a frequency, not a concept. Notice where it resonates in your body. The first might land in your head, the seat of observation. The second in your heart, the center of resonance. The third in your gut, the root of will. You're not creating a belief system. You're tuning an instrument. And instruments require practice. Repetition. Muscle memory that runs deeper than conscious thought. Do this every single night. Make it as automatic as brushing your teeth. And when the final moment comes, whether tomorrow or decades from now, whether sudden or slow, whether you're ready or not, you'll know exactly what to think. Because you've been practicing it every single night for years. Your last thought won't be panic or regret or desperate prayer to a God you're not sure exists. It will be recognition. Oh, this threshold. I know this place. I've been here before. And you'll move through death the way you've been moving through sleep, awake, aware, and choosing your next reality with the precision of someone who's been preparing for this their entire life. The sovereignty was always yours. The choice was always available. You just needed to know it existed and practice it until it became reflex. Now you know. And every night between now and your last breath is an opportunity to make that reflex unshakable. So when you lie down tonight and your body begins to dissolve into sleep, remember, you're not just resting, you're rehearsing. You're training for the moment when the final thought arrives, and you're ensuring that when it does, it won't be fear or confusion that determines your trajectory. It will be the frequency you've been cultivating all along. Awareness, choice, sovereignty. This is your inheritance. This is your training. This is your preparation for the most important thought you'll ever have.